Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Be That 1% podcast. Thank you for being here, and you are going to love this episode. About 6 to 8 months ago, Amanda and I made a podcast episode on relationships. We talked about presence, we talked about intimacy, sex, and kind of the dynamics that can happen inside relationships and what has happened inside ours of 13 years. And we talked about, the strategies that we use regularly, if not on a daily basis, to keep our relationship healthy and strong. And that went viral, not just on social media, but just in my podcast downloads, and how many of you reached out saying this was great, we want more of this. And so here we are doing another version of this time with Dr. Katherine Hertlein to offer a therapeutic lens onto what we kind of already have learned, and some of the stuff that she talked about was really, really fascinating, and we were doing parts of it but not all of it, and it's helpful to understand the science and the psychology behind things. As you know, that's what I love. And so you're gonna get a lot of tacticals from this episode, which I always am a fan of. Dr. Katherine Hertlein is a professor in the Couple and Family Therapy program in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Health at UNLV. She received her master's degree in marriage and family therapy from Purdue and a doctorate in human development with a specialization in marriage and family therapy from Virginia Tech. She's very smart. She's world-renowned. She's written almost 13 books, and she is just known in this space in, couples therapy, but also sex therapy, which go hand in hand. And so she was great, and you're going to love this episode. So before we hop into that, I want to share a few things on, one, the importance of an idea, and two, what's coming up for Forge here in the next 7 days. First, the idea. Have you ever been driving somewhere or in the shower or, wherever you were, and an idea, a thought just came to your mind? And you're like, wow, I love that. That's such a good idea. Maybe it was to run a marathon. Maybe it was to start a business. Maybe it was to have a certain conversation inside of a relationship. And that idea just felt so resonant in your soul. Maybe it hit you in the heart, and it was just like, man, that's what happened to me with the idea of Forge. That's also what happened to me with the idea of running that or walking that 61 miles and then doing the 78 miles and now doing 100 miles in October. It's these ideas that they're different. They just seep in, and when you have them, they're something comes alive in you, right? And I'm bringing this up because Forge is an all men's immersive experience. For those who don't know, 8 days, no tech, in Costa Rica, diving deep on leadership, communication, leveraging the genius of the group. We got 8 people coming, 8 different industries. The diversity is what makes it amazing. No one is in the same field. So you're going to offer the genius of each person to the group, and the group is bigger than each individual, and really, really excited about it. But that idea came to me in October, and I had never done an international retreat before. I'd never added philanthropy into my experiences internationally. I have, a lot of this was new to me. I didn't have the skill set yet, but I had the resources and I had the courage to try. And because I have, the person I've become along this journey has upgraded. The capacity to hold a vision, the capacity to learn new skills at a rapid rate, the belief that I've had in myself to bring this to life, all those things I would not have had if I didn't follow this idea. And so I'm here to remind you to take that idea off the shelf if you've put it up there, and to take action towards it, because you were given that idea for a reason, and it felt the way that it did for a reason. And so to do it justice is to take action on it and to believe in it and to fan the flames, regardless of how long it takes. And I think you'll be grateful that you did. The second thing is philanthropy, charity. We're doing a charity component for Forge, and there's 3 components to it. 1, we're supporting children. 2, we're supporting and combating deforestation, like supporting the planting of trees and combating deforestation. And 3, we are supporting the recycling initiatives going on in Costa Rica. And so a bit about each of those real quick. And if you feel called, we would love your support. And we're halfway through our goal. And all the money that we raise is going directly to these organizations. Dream Catchers is the first one that supports underprivileged children. These are the children that grow up in very harsh environments, drugs, abuse, violence, and a lot of these kids don't develop their own voice. They are stuck. They don't believe that their dreams are possible. And Dream Catchers really houses them and brings them in and teaches them the skills to live life on their terms, to not repeat the same patterns from the past, and to be able to self-express. They teach them martial arts. They teach them art. They teach them how to, they allow them to play and really foster their innate gifts. And so we're really blessed to be able to partner up with them. The second is Costas Verdes. They've almost planted 100,000 trees in their existence, and we'll be planting what they call the defender tree, which is the buffer between the seawater and the moisture getting into the rainforest. Because of these deforestation efforts and the farmlands that have been produced in the 1980s in Costa Rica, the jungle has taken a hit. The rainforest is not in a healthy place. And so their goal is to really create these buffer zones where the moisture can get to the rainforest, but not the salt water that kind of erodes the trees and the leaves. So we'll be planting trees while we're there. And then also the third is the recycling. Now, these women are incredible. They took it upon themselves in 2008 to go and pick up trash in a country that did not have any, or a city, I said, that didn't have any trash municipalities, meaning no one picked up their trash. Not until 2019 was it actually a thing. And so, for nearly over a decade, they've just been in the trenches, gathering tons and tons of garbage and plastics and recycling it and putting it and being able to reuse it. And it's just grueling work. And the leaders that we've met are so heart-centered and so purpose-driven, but even they get tired, And so we want to be able to show not just in dollars, but also in effort. And so we're going to be helping them with the recycling initiatives while we're down there. And I'm personally looking forward to learning more about recycling because I know it's a growing concern with how much plastic we're finding in our water supply. So I'll keep you guys posted on that. But in the link in this episode, you will find a link to donate if you feel that you can support. We would love it. Any amount counts. Any amount is valuable. So please consider. And then lastly, I want to thank our sponsors for Forge. These individuals, these companies have given us the tools to continue to do the work that we do, and also to feel good while we do it. First is LMNT. It's a salt, electrolyte salt that you put in your water. I first had this at Warrior Retreats, and it was just the way that it fueled me was amazing. It sustained my focus for the whole day, and I felt great. I felt that the altitude didn't hit me as much, and my energy was long-lasting throughout the 17 days that I was in Peru. The other sponsor we have is Strong Coffee, and this is coffee and essential nutrients in seconds. This is such a great tool for traveling, and also they have coffee that comes with protein. Like imagine the 15 grams of protein in some of the coffees that they have, which is always a great addition to your workout and your lifestyle routines. And then lastly is Nike. Nike really hooked us up with the gear and some water bottles and making sure that we look good as we show up and serve. So I want to thank you guys for believing in myself, believing in Forge, and thank you for the work that you do. I am a believer in each of these products. I've tried them time and time again, and I believe in them. I trust in them. So if this feels aligned, check them out, and you won't regret it. So now on to this incredible show, and be ready to take some notes. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Be That 1% podcast. I'm grateful that you are here. If this is your first time, welcome. And if you're a return listener, welcome home. I'm super blessed and honored to have the guests to my left here, one being my amazing wife. And we also have a very, very special guest, Dr. Katherine Hertlein, who is world renowned and has dove deep into relationships, into intimacy, sexuality, and has helped so many people just learn more about themselves in their couples and within their relationships. And so Amanda and I recorded recorded a podcast on intimacy, sex, and kind of presence inside relationships. That went viral. And so today we're like, all right, let's see where we can go within this conversation and what pops up with someone who is extremely qualified to be guiding us in that area. So Amanda is going to do the honors of introing our guest today, and we'll get started here.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to have you here, Kat.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, absolutely. We're so honored. And a kind of more intro in the sense of why I wanted you to be here. So I came across you because I was in the works of, here goes my hands talking, right? In the works of trying to get into the master's program at UNLV for therapy. And when I came across who my professors might be, you just like stuck out to me because of the area I want to go into around self-love, relationships, intimacy, sex therapy. You were the only one doing it on campus. And I was just like, this is so important. And then when we got to connect and talk, you're like, you can't be a good couples therapist without being a good sex therapist, and that they go hand in hand. And then the more I saw how many accolades you have, 13 books, 14 books you're writing now, I think even 15 you're on, all the things that you've dove into and research, I was just like, we need to have you on as this part 2 to this episode we recorded. So now you can really give our listeners some tactical principles, maybe foundational things that you see in your office that you researched, instead of us just talking about all these concepts, maybe in our relationship or things that we see, bringing you in to be that expert voice. So that's the why I wanted you to be here. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm just so honored to have the invitation. So
yeah. Thank you. All right. Rapid fire question.
Okay.
Here we go. First one, born and raised.
Chicago, Illinois. More specifically, I was born in Berwyn, Illinois.
Okay.
It's just outside Chicago.
Beautiful.
And raised in Downers Grove.
Okay.
Suburb.
Okay. What's a philosophy that you live by?
Everything's okay in the end. If it's not okay, it's not the end.
I like that.
She knew that right off the bat.
Yeah, she lives it. What's a recent book that you've read that has offered immense value to you?
I would say the book, The Past Life Perspective. It's a book that is a bit unusual. It's written by a couple and family therapist in California. And she talks about her client base, which is largely hypnotherapy related cases. And she does these past life regressions. The interesting part about the book is, not whether or not you believe that people have past lives or not past lives, but in each of these stories, she uncovers what is a universal truth or what were some of the universal truths for that particular client. And she puts them at the end of each chapter. And some are the same. Some people share some of the same universal truths. Some of them are unique to an individual. And they basically all get back to we need to focus on being empathetic human beings, look at everybody from a perspective of humanity, and is a very important book, I think, in terms of returning to what's important and highlighting that.
I love that. What is a piece of advice that has served you well over the years?
Okay, so I had a wonderful meeting with an individual on campus who was a leader when I took over the role of program director of the MFT program years ago. And we went out to lunch and he said 2 things. He said, you're the director. Number 1, keep your facts straight. And number 2, if you're the director, direct. And those are things that I've always kept in my mind. Keep your facts straight and direct.
Why do you think he said the facts? Like, what?
He's an
how
attorney.
Did you really take that on? Oh, okay.
He's an attorney. And I thought to myself, that was darn good advice.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Was he like, okay, so as the director now, like no matter what it is that you feel, here's where you need to make sure that you're the same no matter what.
And I think that was part of it. And I think the other part was, when you're going to talk to other entities within the system about what is going on in the unit, keep your facts straight, right? If you're going to get more respect, if you're able to represent both sides of something instead of one side that you're leaning toward.
Okay.
Great. What is a belief of yours that supports your growth?
That's a good question. I think a belief of mine that supports my growth is that change is always possible.
Yes.
As a therapist, I'd be a really bad one if I thought people couldn't change, right? But I also think that's true for myself. And I'm always looking to reinvent myself, I don't put myself on a time limit of, well, I've done these things and I've written so many books, so I'm done writing books. Like that just didn't occur to me. There's always something new to learn. There's always a new way to change. There's always something to learn about yourself. And so that I think what has helped me kind of launch into new projects, new ideas, and throw myself into new opportunities.
That's great.
I love that.
And then last question, what does the world need more of right now?
Therapists. Okay. I don't know advice. Actually, and I think we need more therapists because we have a lot of challenges as society. So if I really peel it back and get to that challenge, I think what we need is more compassion. Mm-hmm. I think there has to be more understanding. We need to look at people with more empathy and work toward cultivating compassion instead of looking at division.
Yeah, I agree. Beautiful.
It's like the really leaning in to see someone, their story,
yes,
understanding why they did what they did, even if whatever happened wasn't good or right.
Sure, right.
But being able to lean in and really understand.
I love what you said, being able to see someone, being able to actually see someone, not have these interactions that are transactional, but have interactions that are meaningful. And that's what I'm about. I'm about building relationships in whatever I do, right? Sure. Part of it's therapy. I build relationships there. Sometimes I might divide them. I don't mean to, but I'm doing my best, right? But it's in anything that you do. When you work with students, you're building relationships. When you work with faculty, you're building relationships. When you work with editors, you're building relationships. So no matter what area I'm in or where I'm placed, my focus is going to be on the art of building relationships. And that's what I'm about.
That's what we're about.
Yeah.
Yes, right. That's
why we're in alignment with each other.
That's why we're
right
here.
Yes.
Exactly. So I guess our first question really is like, in your years of doing this, I'm sure you've seen lots of things. What currently has surprised you about maybe what you've learned or what you've seen or what you've witnessed?
I have been most surprised, and maybe this speaks to the change piece. I have been most surprised by people's ability to defend themselves from the truth. And what I mean by that is when I think it's very plain what's happening, when I think it's very easy to spot what it is that's going on and that someone needs to do something different to avoid the same outcome, the rationale I get for continuing in the same behavior and the kind of ear closing and eye closing that I get in order to protect whatever it is that's going on, and that level of defense has continued to be a surprise to me. And again, that's a difference in perhaps the way in which I see things. I enjoy change. I like change in myself. I believe that lots of people can change for lots of different reasons. So it began to confuse me early on as a therapist when I would see someone sitting across from me and they would be arguing against change. And arguing against change for their own reasons, or they didn't see what I was showing them. And I thought, how could you not see the pieces of these picture match up? I'm not understanding. So for me, it's been this inability to really confront our demons and be able to move forward from that and maybe take a little bit more of a humble approach and say, maybe there are things I could work on, or develop a curiosity about what it is that someone across the room is talking about. Right. Yeah. So for me, it's about looking at how do we work with people to sort of bring down their defenses in such a way that they can really see the truth, keep their facts straight, right?
Well, you said something to me that was like they're protecting themselves. It's they're protecting this identity, and they have to give these excuses to why they're living this way because they don't, I'm sure in their head, they don't want to be this bad person or like this thing is bad. Like, it's like a justification.
Sure. Yes. And it all comes from that ego defense, right? I recently read another book, The Ego and Its Defenses, a great book. I didn't learn any, mind-blowing philosophies out of it like I did out of the past life perspective, but it was a really instructional take on how and when these ego defenses get, activated. And one of the things that author said in that book, which I'd never really considered and really understood, was that the development of an ego defense is in the result of an internal conflict. And it's the way in which we resolve internal conflict. We come up with an ego defense. And I never really understood it that way. And as this book kind of goes through and explains the different kinds of ego defenses, they're all the result of some kind of internal conflict. That's how we resolve it. So
part of me is just starting to think of like all these different parts of ourselves kind of through IFS system and terms of theory. For those of you that don't know what IFS is, it's internal family systems, which is a treatment theory in therapy that therapists may use to help someone navigate all the different inner workings of themselves. I guess is the best way to describe that.
Yes. I think that's a good description. And, I'm not going to try to step on the toes of the people who developed IFS, but the main idea is that you have some particular parts that serve a function, right? Firefighters and managers and exiles, they serve a function, much like when we have an ego defense, it's serving a function.
To protect,
correct. Unlike the IFS crew, IFS works toward how do we get these pieces sort of moving together to be able to operate from a more coherent sense of self. And from a more psychodynamic or psychoanalytic perspective, the ego defense people, when they talk about resolving that internal conflict, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to bring all these pieces together. There are lots of different ways to be able to resolve that internal conflict. So that, I think, is the difference in the approaches.
I love the dynamics of the types of relationships that you get to cultivate throughout your career, throughout your work. What are some common behavioral or thought processes that destroy relationships?
Oh, that's a great. Okay, first one. We're going to talk all day long. Ready? Okay. So the first one, when you assume your partner does not have good intentions, that is in fact where I start in couples therapy. Because if you don't think your partner has good intention, anything I say as a therapist and anything that you might do as a couple is going to be viewed with suspicion by the other person. Right? So I might have the best intervention in the world, and I often do. Just kidding. But I actually might. And when you go execute that intervention, if you don't think she has good intentions, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what I've done, doesn't matter what you've done. And all that's going to do is breed a level of defensiveness and contempt and all the things that we can't tolerate. So where I usually start in couples therapy is we have to get to a place of good intentions and assuming that our partner has good intentions, because without that, you're going to get destroyed.
Right.
Okay. A second thing that happens with couples that tends to sort of destroy or interfere is this assumption of the belief of communication. And what that means is that when partners are working with each other for a long period of time or living with each other for a long period of time, we can pretty much understand and predict how a certain interaction is going to roll out, right? I know if I say this, they're going to respond this way, then I'm going to do this. And we play that out in our heads so much so that we get to the conclusion that we think is going to happen. And we say, well, I don't even need to have the conversation because I already know how this is going to go. So we've got one
That's
person
all here.
Yeah, and they've just rolled it out here. So that assumption of believing how a communication event is going to roll out is really troublesome for relationships because you don't give your partner a chance to be different. And to have a change opportunity and to grow in a different way. So those are two of, I think, the things that are really difficult in terms of managing couples. A third thing is when you believe that your partner should read your mind. I understand. I've been married a long time, 25 years. And I know I look like I'm 12. However, I've been married a long time. And there are definitely some days, I don't know if it's my age getting to like senior moments or not, but I definitely have a thought. And I think to myself that I've told my husband just because I think it, right? Because we're close. And I think if I think something, he should know it. But couples kind of get in that same way, right? We've been together a long time. I told you this in 1972. You should know that I like flowers on Thursday for my birthday and not 13, but 12 because of it, whatever, right? We get into these patterns where we think that our partner needs to read our mind. And that is not the job of a partner. I don't care how long you've been together. You really still have to work on communicating what it is that you need. Needs change over time. The same thing that you wanted a year ago is not the same thing that you want tomorrow, right? I don't want for dinner today what I ate yesterday, right? Needs change over time. And the only way to be able to navigate that with your partner is to open your mouth and say something. So that's what I would say.
No, those are all huge. There's so many things right now. Well, I'm like, gosh, there's just so many different chapters and stages of life. Like if you decide this is my person that I want to do life with.
Yes.
It's not going to be the same in the beginning as it is.
It shouldn't be.
You would hope not.
You would hope not. You would hope not. Right.
But then why is it, well, this is just the human dynamics and you can answer this how you want. Why is it that we know it's not going to be different, yet then the mind goes back to when things almost first started and expect that to then just roll into this new chapter of your life 5 years down the road.
It's comfortable. It's what we're used to. It's, when you think about early on in the relationship, that's when you had all the hormones going, and that's when life felt good, right? Yeah. And then life gets real, right? And we have jobs and kids and all the things that we have going on. Yeah. And it becomes quite difficult, I think, to be able to replicate the same kind of emotional space, the same kind of intellectual space even that we used to have. I could barely finish a sentence anymore, right? My husband and I will always look across the table because I start something and my son's like, yada, yada. And my husband and I are now doing this eye conversation, like, can't finish a sentence, right? Yeah. So it's really important to be able to intellectually, emotionally create a space to be able to move through those changes together. And when those changes happen, don't expect or mourn for what was past, but get excited about what the future can bring.
I think a lot of people are mourning about what was once there in their relationship and maybe isn't there anymore.
It felt good and whatever. Like, I understand it. But there's a whole new world of things waiting for you in your relationship if you try different things over time. The same thing is true about intimate relationships, right? The way in which our body responds is not the same all the time over the years. And so I'll work with couples and say, we'll kind of work on one issue, and they like to, display their intimacy in a particular way. And I'll say things like, that's great for now. And do you plan on being together 20 or 30 years from now? Well, of course we are. And I said, great. Then you're going to have to be flexible about the way in which you express yourselves. And the same is true about lots of different things. Couples do the best when there is flexibility and support. Without those things, you're in trouble. And so I work really hard to communicate with couples that degree of flexibility is really, really central to their ability to navigate change as they move through their lives together and independently.
So a couple things coming up to my mind.
So many things
so
happening.
many questions. One thought is the interplay between control and curiosity. And the control and the self-preservation side of things. It's like, I want to be able to predict. I want to be able to know what's going to happen. I got to control certain things. But I think control inside relationships kind of stagnates the relationship because it keeps people where the other person thinks they should be.
Yes.
As opposed to curiosity, which provides a space for expansion or newness or adventure, all things that keep us young and healthy and all of that. So that was what's coming up for me when you were saying those things. I've also heard you say that two big destroyers of relationship is lack of perceived neglect from the other person, and then also lack of control.
Yes, correct.
Can you bridge those two concepts together for us?
Sure. There was a research article that was done in 2010, and basically this researcher went and looked at all the different complaints that people have in their couple relationships, right? Like, I'm being treated this way, I feel judged, I feel threatened, whatever it is, right? And analyzed those and basically decided that each of the things that people complain about could really be in one of two categories and nothing else: perceived neglect or perceived threat / lack of control. And I read this article and I thought, this is the craziest thing I've ever read. And so I began to explore and play with the idea a little bit in my couples. Wouldn't you know, I think this individual is exactly right. So as a couples therapist, it's overwhelming for me to think about all of the problems that a couple might have. It's equally overwhelming for the couple to think about all of the things that they might think are wrong, right? Oh, the kids and the money and the this and the that. So we've got to, first of all, simplify what it is that our concerns are about. And if you can get couples to say, which is it for you? When you say that, for example, my partner won't let me access the money. Is that about perceived neglect for you? You don't feel seen? Or is it about perceived lack of control? You don't have access to your resources. And couples will give me a little think about it. Okay, I think it's this one for me. Great. And then, issues around intimacy or issues around child rearing or issues around communication, which is what couples always say it is, but it never is, right? Never. I say, if that was true, you'd go see a communications expert, and that's not me. So pick something else. All right. One of these two, pick one, make my job easy. Not a smart girl, need it broken down. Right. So, when we think about those other issues, which is it for you? Well, for you, it might be perceived neglect, right? I want my partner to be attending to me by listening when I put down a limit with the kids and supporting that. And if they're not supporting that, then I don't feel attended to. Once we can get couples to be able to identify which one of those two main themes it is, then all we have to do is work on the theme. We don't have to work on the 40 different issues and do all the literature search on how do you work with a couple with budget? How do you work with a couple, right? We don't have to do any of that. All I got to figure out is perceived neglect versus perceived lack of control, and which of the two of you wants to go first in terms of ameliorating the issue. So that's largely how I'm working with it.
That's cool. And if you lump it down into those two simple things, that sparks curiosity of like, what am I doing that is creating that perception?
Yes.
And what can I do to potentially solve that?
For sure, for sure. And you'll notice that couples then start coming in about, well, here's an issue that we had with perceived neglect. So they started then classifying it themselves. Now we don't have 5 issues as a couple. We pretty much have 1 or 2.
Yeah.
And that feels a lot more hopeful to me.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, there's these buckets and these foundational pieces, right?
Yes.
And so on the flip side of that, like you mentioned a little bit, flexibility and, oh my gosh, support. Are there any other 2 foundational pieces that you think this is what really unites a couple and makes them resilient to withstand the test of time, no matter what may come their way? So flexibility, support, are there anything else, or is there anything else?
I think, again, if you take that general impression that your partner is doing the best they can and they really care about you, and their decisions are from places of good, instead of deciding that their decisions are motivated by fear or anger or not liking you for some reason, those couples will do far better, right? Because then whatever comes up, your messaging about it is not about who you are as a person or what your shortcomings might be. It's about my partner's doing the best they can with what they have at the time. And now I can sort of come in with the support to be able to navigate that.
The good intentions piece requires trust, I think. Trust in that the other person is actually meaning good, and trust that whatever comes up in that conversation, they can handle. What are some action items that people can begin to work on just that part alone, the intention piece?
I actually don't think it requires trust.
No,
not initially. No. And part of that is because I've got to start somewhere. And if I had to start with the trust before I did anything else, I would never get anything done. Okay. So I actually start with opportunities where we can pretend. You have to fake it till you make it. And that is true in some of the couple dynamic pieces. It's true when we're working with couples where there's kind of an intimacy disruption in some capacity. Fake it till you make it. So the first thing that I'll do, action item, is I say to couples, listen, over the next week, I want you to pick a day when you believe your partner's coming from good intentions. And you pick a day when you believe your partner, everything they're giving to you is from good intentions. But the key is you don't tell each other which day it is. And if you're really good at it, your partner won't be able to tell. And we'll circle back here in a week and we'll figure it out. So in doing that, they actually start to display the behaviors of assuming that their partner is coming from good intention, which naturally then changes the cycle, at least a little bit. When I get a little bit more buy-in in that way, then I start working on trust, right? I don't have to have the 100% assumption of good intent. I can usually get by with about 80 to 90%, right? Then I can work on some of the issues related to trust, process things if I need to, get clarity on some comments that were made, have people develop that stance of curiosity like you mentioned. So a partner says something and I see a face go off. I say, why don't you turn and ask? Your face did a thing. I saw it. Why don't you turn and ask them questions about what that was instead of doing the face? That's probably going to be more productive, right? Cool. Okay. So then we can start to build that trust a little bit more, and whatever's left on the remainder of the assumption of good intent is going to continue to come up. So that's kind of one action item. You've got to fake it till you make it. Act as if, right? And see how that changes what happens day to day.
Is faith involved in that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I think that's kind of I guess faith and trust are close to me.
They are. And there's got to be faith in the process.
Right.
Faith in me, faith in the process. You've got to have a level of hope.
Yes.
Right? Otherwise, you're going to sabotage it because
Correct.
Those ego defenses are going to come up.
Right.
And, we don't want that happening, right? We don't want anybody messing it up, right? You're paying a lot of money. You don't want your work messed up, right? Okay.
Right.
So, yeah. So part of that is also the therapist setting the stage for that hope and that faith. And what I tell couples is you may not trust each other. You may not have hope in this process right now. And that's like early first or second session when I'm working with them. And I say, but I have the hope. And I'm going to hold the hope until the two of you have it, and then I can give it back to you. Yeah. And so that tends to be kind of a soft message about how the hope isn't gone. I'm just going to keep it until you're ready for me to give it back to you.
Cool. Yeah.
I like that.
And then I like how that homework, the perception of it, right? Like what you look for, you tend to find the same way. Maybe couples are coming in those first few sessions and they're really just looking at all the things that aren't going right.
Yes.
And they're just nitpicky. And that's why they come in with 10 different problems. And you're like, let's narrow it down to these 2 buckets.
Right.
Go home. Let's do this homework. Find those different qualities in each other, but you're not you're not telling each other, you're just noticing.
Right.
So then you're looking for moments. Your brain wants to answer that question of like, is this a moment? Is that a moment?
Absolutely.
You're almost tricking them.
Yeah. That's exactly what it is, right? I'm not a strategic therapist for no reason, right? And if you're really good at the activity, you might do it a few days and then try to trip your partner up. Because if you've done it 3 days and they only pick one, you'll be like, you didn't get it. The other thing that I find is often one person will say, I think they did that on Thursday. And the other person's like, actually, I forgot to do it. And I'm like, but isn't that cool? You accidentally changed the pattern. Yeah. So there's
you weren't intentional with it, but yet your character showed through as being trustworthy or with good intent.
Of course. So this is possible. Anything is possible. Look at the possibilities,
and then that inspires hope. And you can give it back to them.
That's exactly the process, right?
And then the trust emerges because, oh my gosh, I can trust this person again.
Yeah.
Whatever, because I know that infidelity, betrayal, anything that would yield disconnection from their partner.
So much now, unfortunately, right?
I know. I know.
So that's precisely it. Getting a place where they're able to do those patterns themselves, and I can just sort of take a step back and go ahead, run your program now.
Yeah.
We're good.
Mm-hmm.
So.
I'd love to talk to you about what your definition is around what connection is versus disconnection. And then how would you define intimacy versus sex? So if you want to go more of the connection base, what is when a couple is disconnected, how would you define that?
That's a great question. I actually feel that almost energetically. When I think about connection, I think about energy. I think about what I'm feeling as I'm sort of watching these two people either sitting on opposite sides of the couches or, whatever. I can pick something up in terms of their energy that's directed at each other, whether it's looking at each other, not looking at each other. A ton is said in those small moments. So that's when I think of connection and disconnection, I think of the psychic energy that's going on between a couple. When I think about intimacy, I think of it as an interpersonal process. So how are we communicating with our partner? How is our partner receiving our communication? And then how are we responding? Not reacting, responding. And that is in fact what builds intimacy. And so some of it can be physical. Our body certainly has a way of being able to pick up what's happening physiologically and often responds before we're cognitively aware of what's happening, right? But intellectually, there's also another process that goes on that sort of suits us emotionally. So when I think about intimacy, generally, I think about situations where people are doing disclosures that are not factual. They're disclosures that are about themselves as a person. They're somewhat vulnerable, some kind of emotional disclosure. The second partner responds in a way that is validating. And that by validating, I mean, it's going to be warm. It's going to be caring. It's going to demonstrate a level of understanding. And then the first person who gave the disclosure is going to be happy and satisfied with the way in which that response went. So it's kind of a 3-part process in my view.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think intimacy is everything. I mean, how can you have really meanful conversations if that's not there?
I feel like in this day and age,
or
intimacy
depth,
is so confused with sex. I feel like the intimacy, the understanding of intimacy is so misconstrued.
Yes,
especially as we get into more of, we're in 2024. Everything has a screen. Everything has technology. You're diving into AI research and all of this stuff. Like, the intimacy, the vulnerability, that loop of connectedness, is starting to get more and more destroyed. And intimacy isn't just, let's go have this physical act together. We're fine. There's so much that's getting lost.
For sure. Because you can have a sexual interaction and not be intimate.
No.
You can have an interaction and not be connected to your partner, right? And so I think that speaks exactly to that point. Sometimes we even get connected to the devices, to the phones, and we understand we have an intimate relationship with the phone in some way because it responds to us perhaps more quickly than our partner does.
Yeah.
We build an attachment. It gives us what we need when we need it, what we perceive we need, right?
Yeah.
And our partner just isn't that fast, right? They're not Google, right? So we have to work on some allowances to be able to give our partner a chance and an opportunity to do the connection. One of the things that surprises me most about couples is when, I give, it's just a small intervention, like, okay, well, I want you to look each other in the eye like 70% of the time this week. And the couple will say, we already do that. And I say, I promise you don't. Because if you did, you wouldn't be in my office. Okay. Because that's totally it. Right. And so that really speaks to how you forge that level of kind of psychic connection and how you start building that intimacy. Other things that I'll work with couples is telling them to have sex with the lights on or telling them to be looking at each other in the eye, because again, it's that space of what you mentioned in terms of the vulnerability. And it helps us to really connect with our partner and not just sort of go through a specific act.
Yes. I'd love to talk on presence.
I was
I don't
just gonna
know.
ask that,
Are
yeah.
you serious? Okay. Go for it.
Yeah. One of the things that I really like as a concept is the idea of presence, just being where your feet are, being in the moment.
Yes.
How important is that to you just in the work that you do, but maybe with the interference of technology fracturing that presence because it's split between my screen and what you're saying, which I'm really not in both? How can that be effective? It's more so like, can I be fully in what I'm doing to maximally engage?
Yes.
So what are your thoughts on presence and how do you think about it in terms of relationships?
I think you're spot on, frankly. There's a lot of research that talks about how happiness is rooted in our ability to be really fully present in the moment.
Yeah.
So one of the things I teach in my personal growth class is that we really need to be sitting in spaces where we can feel our feet on the floor and whatever it is that we're doing in the moment, the grass under our feet or feel the air on our face, whatever it is, to really get boiled down to that sense of presence, just based on a research perspective, which is going to increase our happiness. A second thing is, there's a great issue in terms of anxiety. When you see a lot of people in the room, everybody says that they've got anxiety, and they do, unfortunately, right? This is a very anxious situation that everybody's in now, right? Life is hard. And when I think about people with anxiety, a lot of it is this future focused. What will happen? What could be? What might be next? And if you could just sort of sit for a moment and really get back to that grounding and that presence, then your anxiety symptoms will sort of dissipate and you can really just sort of get back into your body again. Anytime you've got this thing where you've got anxiety or you're distracted in some way, we're losing how we're able to detect what's going on with us. I work with my clients and my supervisees to identify that your body is your first tool of when something is wrong. And if we're in spaces where we're distracted and split between two things, you are not paying attention to this instrument. And if you do not pay attention to this instrument, you're going to be in a world of hurt, right? Because you're not going to recognize when feelings are happening, when people are looking or not looking at you or whatever it is, or communicating with you in some way. So I think it becomes incredibly important to be able to take a minute, take 2 minutes, and really get yourself to be present centered and present focused for your own mental health, but also to be able to be present and there for others.
Yes.
And I love the mind-body connection.
Yeah. And especially in conflict.
Oh,
That's when people lose a lot of the presence because they go inward and they start freaking out and protecting and ego projecting and all of it. So it's like presence isn't just when things are going well or just when you're in nature. It's in everything. It's when you're eating. It's when you're driving. It's when, all that.
Mindful eating. So you don't overeat, because we could certainly sit in front of a screen and, do a whole bunch of that. Yeah. And it really does become important. I like what you said about it's kind of not just when, we're stressed or in turmoil. You have to develop a practice around doing it so that you can get your body's alarms to go off and notice them when they go off.
Right.
If you haven't practiced kind of being at this idle level, and you're constantly operating from up here, when things disrupt you, it's going to be much harder to regulate, right? So we have to get into a space where we're in a place where we're present, we're able to read our body, read people around us. And then when things sort of go a little bit wonky, you don't have to do this necessarily deep dive and try to do 5 days of meditation. It's not going to work. You can't meditate yourself out of trauma, you know?
Yeah.
And no, I mean, I don't mean to say that about the trauma practice. I'm sure you can. There's a lot of mind body work, but you can't do it in 5 days. Pretty sure you can't do it in 5 days, right? And I think people know the presence skills. They understand its value, but there's a seduction around our technology, our devices, things going off, work calling, whatever it is. So we really need to make a practice of being in that moment and understanding what it's like to feel our bodies and to know what our radar is going off and what our alarms are.
Right. And to come back to that control thought, it's like, can you control your energy and your time wherever you're at? Because if it's given to external things, then you're just at the whim of whatever's happening, and you're a fluctuation and not a constant.
Yes.
Especially in leadership positions.
For sure. And you have to make sure that you are coming from this level of grounding, especially if you're in a leadership position, because people are watching you.
Right.
They're watching you and you become a model, whether you like it or not, right?
It's like a parent.
It is like a parent. It is
They're
like a
always
parent.
watching.
They're always watching, right? Whether you like it or not. So there are things that as leaders, we can even train people to do. Now, that also doesn't mean you have to be perfect as a leader.
Right.
There's a level of humility that's really important into the role. When I am in spaces where I'm a leader, I have no problem saying things like, that was me, mea culpa, and making sure that I'm protecting my team and making sure that, you know, if there's something that's going to come out of it, that I say, you know what, I'm going to take one for the team here. So there's a way to be able to be humble. There's a way to be able to lead that doesn't mean that you're perfect, but it also means that you're setting the tone and setting the example for what you value.
I want to touch on this like individualistic part of a couple as a whole. Like each person holding weight and being responsible for their own selves in the relationship. And how important do you feel? Well, I feel like I already know this answer, but how important do you feel it is that each person is doing their own inner work, their own understanding of themselves, working on all the things that we just talked about, right? Like the ability to cultivate presence, to have that mindfulness, to separate when you need to, and then connect. Like if I'm doing that, but he's not, how connected are we going to be?
Not very after a long period of time, right?
How important do you feel is it for each individual person to be like holding their own weight as it relates to them in a couple or in a unit? And that could go from a leadership to a team perspective too.
Sure. I think it is important. I think that when you are coming from spaces where people aren't doing their contribution, relationship work, you know, whatever, it's important to be able to, number one, kind of evaluate what's going on there. Are they not doing it out of something like where they don't have resources? Do they not know what this is going to entail? Like, what's that? Like, is it a resource problem or is it a personality problem? Is that they're not willing because of their defenses to sort of try to figure out what the next step would be to be able to care for themselves, right?
Yeah.
And the danger is if you have one member of the couple who is expanding, growing, and they're changing, and the other person stays the same, you're going to figure out that you're not a match over a long period of time. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's destined to be. That's a possibility as well. But for couples to really grow together, I think there has to be some work that's done individually to at least be kind of moving forward so that they're not so distant from each other that they become unrecognizable. And that can happen over, you know, long-term relationships, right? You have a strong level of commitment, but perhaps the partners haven't done enough to be able to cultivate that intimacy or that passion. They've just gotten into the grind of work and things, and maybe one person does the inner work and one person doesn't. And then after 20 years, they look at each other and go, I don't know who you are.
Yeah. How did we get there?
How did we get here? How did we get here?
One day compiled. And then before you know, all of those things, same way with people being intimately connected, having sex, like, wait, oh my gosh, we haven't had sex in 2 months or whatever it might be. And they don't realize it's happened until they look back.
And that's it. And it's the retrospective. Then what do you do about it at that point? That's when some couples come into treatment and go, we really need changes. And I say things like, how long has this problem been going on? And they say 12 years. And I say, well, what do you want me to do about it? How long are you going to give me? And they say 2 weeks. And I say, this is impossible. Okay. Like, let's be realistic. Right.
Yeah.
So I think there has to be a sense of acknowledgement of the work that you're doing, and that's important. But also when you recognize your partner isn't doing that work, you know, what's your curiosity and your explanation for that, right? Is it something that in the relationship that was originally a mismatch? Is there a sense of fear around that? And there can be a conversation. It doesn't have to be one person sort of doing the work over here and nobody doing anything, right?
Yeah. Well, because that creates this like whole disconnected versus us as a team, as a unit, striving towards the same common goal versus, well, we're here because she told me I need to be here.
Of course.
I mean, the woman is the one that's going to naturally seek out, or typically, not always, but you know, we tend to seek out more resources and Google the things and all of this stuff. And then the partner kind of comes along. That's at least in the typical male-female relationship and things like, there's so many different kinds of relationships now, but coming to like the therapy office and they're sitting there for the first time and you're seeing like all these disconnects happening. How do you read them like a book being like, I know exactly why you're here. And like you seeing like things like play out over and over and over and over again, being like, you guys aren't the only ones experiencing this. Like is there like these common threads that just keep occurring over and over? And that now you notice with technology, the lack of presence, more and more of these norms are starting to appear.
I think there is some truth to that. I think, you know, again, everyone comes in and says it's communication and it's never, and then we kind of roll back to those perceived neglect or control. And I try to get them to organize it. But other trends that I'm seeing are that disconnection that you mentioned. And some of it has to do with employment. Some of it has to do with connecting to other people on technology and then a discovery that there's been someone else where the partner has said some things that are emotional and vulnerable, maybe not even sexual, but emotional and vulnerable. And now we've got a situation where it's considered betrayal by one partner, but the other partner says, well, nothing ever happened, right?
Well, it wasn't physical.
So nothing happened, right?
Yeah.
So what I'm constantly working with early in therapy, when I get some very disparate goals, is I try to roll back the picture. Because if you roll back the picture big enough, you can find the commonality in the couple. What is it that their values are? What's a shared value for them? Or, well, basically it sounds like the both of you have been trying to solve the problem in different ways. And you both have picked really bad ways to solve the problem. And therefore the problem, in fact, the ways you've been trying to solve the problem are making the problem worse. Can we agree to that? Oh, yes. Okay. So I just keep rolling the picture back enough until there's some level of agreement. And then I can start getting work done on that. What you said about some of the ways in which people present, like, well, one person has if I didn't want to be here, one person wants to be here, that is very common. Yeah. And for sometimes people, I'll say, great, then that makes my job easy. Then so-and-so gets whatever she wants. Isn't this easy? You know, and
you kind of just like add humor to it
a little bit.
Diffuse it.
Yep. And so then you have a choice. You can either go with, you're here until this person is happy, and I guess we'll do their goals because you didn't offer any. Sorry for you. Or eventually they'll say, okay, fine, I have a goal. And I'm like, perfect. And actually sometimes that goal really encapsulates the other goals much better. Right. Yeah. So I'm like, fine, if that's what you want. Good. Great.
And you said something around values, which was something that I had sparked in my mind earlier, because we're very big on values as an individual, values within our relationship, the values we have in our business life and in our family.
As a team. Yeah.
Have you noticed when couples get distant and disconnected and like they once started here and then how did they get here? Have you noticed there's any correlation to their values?
Surprisingly, I haven't. In the sense that I think the client's perception and in fact their stated comments are that we don't share the same values anymore. I value this. He doesn't value. And so I'm thinking of a couple who had a religious issue where they were kind of separate on it. Yeah. She's like, I have this value. He doesn't have this value. And again, if you roll back the picture, you can actually look at the fact that they have the same value. They're just trying to express it in different ways. And that way looks right. Because it's not just about it. Our values are not just I have a value and I'm going to live this value. It's I have a value and the value is expressed by these rules. Same thing in an organization, right? Yep. We value education, so we make you take a bunch of classes. right? There you go, right? If we valued education and said, but you don't have to take class, that would be incongruent. So it's not necessarily the values that are in conflict in couples often. It's the way in which they decided that they should be expressed. There's a book that came out called the 5 Love Languages, right?
Yep.
And I hear about that in my practice a lot. The book was great, well-intentioned. However, how couples have started to utilize that is when they come to therapy, I might hear something like, well, my love language is physical, and therefore my partner should do these particular behaviors for me in the bed. And I don't remember that Love Languages book being that prescriptive. And in fact, I think at one time the author did an interview where he was like, people are using it the wrong way. They're using it to kind of beat each other up, right?
Yep.
So that's where they have a value. They do value physical expression, right?
Yeah.
But when you decide that that value is only defined by these behaviors, that's when it becomes I think a disconnect for couples.
Yes, it's the definition.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
perception.
Right. Which is why you have to be
And
flexible.
yes.
Got to have a different definition, right?
Right.
So James and I met in our undergrad at UNLV. We're college
Yay.
sweethearts.
Woo!
We both did kinesiology.
Go Rebels.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Fantastic.
And although he was a few years ahead of me in school and everything, we both took Dr. Mark Guadagnoli's classes.
Yes. I worked with Mark well. Yes.
He's fantastic. And he was the one that really brought on this concept of values and knowing your values, but also
Yes.
that values is a verb.
Yes.
Being able to say, this is my value, or we don't, like, it needs to be in action. It needs to be clearly defined.
Yes.
And you also need to know what you stand for, because if you don't stand for anything, especially in your relationship, that's going to fall.
Absolutely.
It's not on good foundation.
It isn't at all. Right.
Or
right.
in the same way as an individual, being able to like show in action, especially now as a mom to my kids. I say I value growth, but what am I doing every day to grow myself? I say I value, say, creativity. What am I doing every day to tap into that creative aspect of myself?
For sure. I think that's absolutely true. And I do know Mark well, and he and I worked together. I was the Dean's Fellow for the School of Medicine, so I worked with him for a little bit in that role.
Yeah.
And what I really love about Mark is that he lives his values both kind of in his personal life, as you've described, a little bit of what he shared with you, but then also in the business sense, right? So we would have team meetings where he would do these things about values, and that's really important. I like people who are able to be congruent, and that's really, really important to me. So to get to your point, you have to be congruent about your values. You can't just state it to your kids or state it to your partner. There's a level of being congruent. Healthy people are congruent and unhealthy people are not. And that's sometimes the easiest way to spot them in terms of, their lack of congruence or how they're communicating. So another job I think that I like to do is try to make sure that when we're communicating in ways that are congruent, both from ourselves, but then also with the other individual.
Have you,
Go on, sorry.
so I have some friends that have really high standards. And
Oh yeah.
They're probably still single. I'm just kidding.
well, but and they are to a degree. And my question,
Sorry, I should have
is,
not said that.
it's good to have those, but when does such specific, particular standards interfere with someone walking into your life and you building something with that person and not being immediately dismissed? Have you seen that? Have you thought about that?
Yes.
Especially like in the dating world where online, I'm not online versed at all, but like you're putting specifics out there and it's almost like if you don't meet this, we're not going to work. And it's like, well, why even attempt? You know what I mean? So where's the leeway, or like, where's the space to work with in that?
That's such a good comment, especially in a technology world where, anything that's on some kind of dating app, you can put in there, here's what I'm looking for.
Right.
And instead of looking at like a room full of people and talking with people and finding someone who doesn't necessarily meet your criteria, but, maybe they're not a redhead and you like redheads, right? But they're really interesting to talk to.
Yeah.
When you get into an online space, you're filtering out all of those people that could have been potentials.
Correct.
Based on the criteria that you think you're looking for, not the criteria that is there that might actually resonate with you.
Right.
So when we look in spaces where you said we've got a certain level of standards, I can think of a couple exactly where one of the partners was not meeting in the other partner's view, their standards. I uphold them in this certain way. And it means that they're not operating with integrity if they're not operating from these standards, and it means we're not a good match and I need to find someone who's a good match. So again, this is a time where I think about standards are different than values,
Mhm.
right? And often our standards should come from a place of value, right? Do you value spirituality? And if you do, then your standard is around spirituality,
Right.
but maybe not around a particular faith base of so many years or a church part, whatever it is, right? So be thinking about how that standard is reflecting your value. And if it's reflecting something more narrow than your value, you might have to redefine the standard to be able to catch some of the people who might be of interest for you or to whom you might actually connect and grow in that space with.
Yeah. And I also think that some people create those standards so high as a form of like, well, I just haven't found the right one. And they really don't want to be in a relationship.
Of course. Yeah. And there we get back to the ego defenses, right? Like,
exactly.
There you go. You're so well defended. Good job. Good luck with that. And then how far is that going to get you in your life?
Yeah.
Good for you.
And then one more thing is, I can't remember his first name, but it's like Dr. Brooks. He wrote a book on relationships, I think. And it was on Oprah's list or whatever. And one of the things that he pointed out was that relationships that started younger lasted longer than relationships that met later in life because of the openness that people tend to have when they're younger. So if they meet at a younger age, they're not fully formed, developed, rigid in their beliefs. They can collaborate and co-create, as opposed to someone who meets in their 30s, who's well established, has some baggage, and knows exactly what they want, how it needs to go, and then it just meets friction.
I think there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why people who meet younger would do better off, right? In the sense that you've got a lot of familiarity. But I think a key piece of that is what you mentioned. We are going through a growth process, and someone who you've met earlier, you probably met them in a circumstance where there was already a shared value system. Maybe there were families that were connected in some way versus kind of you being out here. And that shared value system is going to do a lot with kind of moving forward in the relationship. But another piece of that is you have someone who's watching you go through transitions. Yeah. So there's a level of flexibility that is already built into the relationship that actually then sustains it later down the line.
That's cool. So knowing that if you do meet later, flexibility becomes even more important.
Absolutely right. Flexibility becomes much more important.
When you're younger, it's okay to like go through these little chapters or make mistakes in those lenses. And then the older you get, it's like, oh my God, like this perfectionism really comes in and things need to be this certain way. And I operate at this level, especially I feel like his clientele has this very like high level performance, high standard. And then they want to equal that. And just like you were saying, that it eliminates so many people that maybe you would have had like a really good energetic connection with.
For sure. Yeah. And I think, some of that may come from our own sense of what we think our value is, or our own sense of self. Like, is there, if you get to a place in your life and you go, okay, well, here are the people I'm looking for, and here's what I'm going to tolerate, and here's what I can offer in a relationship. Is there a fear around somebody else coming in and not matching that, and that challenging your view of yourself? How secure is your view of yourself? Because if you're really quite secure, then you're able to actually interact in lots of spaces and still be who you are. Yeah. So when I think about it from a developmental perspective, as we get into our 20s and 30s, this is where we're really defining our identity, who we are and who we want to be in relationship, right? So as a consequence of that, is there a risk to opening the door to different people because maybe we're not quite grounded in who we are? And the fear is that we might lose that. My sister is a ballet dancer in New York, or she was a ballet dancer for many years in New York. And I really love her relationship with her husband. And the reason is because she was dating all sorts of dancers and, people in the business. And all she really talked about was ballet. Lovely person, but really most of our interactions, she would be telling me about what was going on in her life and the ballet. And when she met this guy who's a camera operator, she started talking about things in the news. And she started reading different things and taking different classes. And I thought, this is the guy for her. Not because he's everything ballet, but because he isn't. And she was at a time in her life when she could open up and start really adopting a new perspective. So she had enough sense of self to be able to get out of herself, to be able to invite those experiences. And so I hope that for lots of the couples in that age range, 20 and 30s, and even beyond that, to be able to really trust your own sense of self and who you are, to be able to open the door to others. Just because someone isn't perfect or doesn't meet your standard doesn't mean anything about who you are as a person.
Yeah.
And if you think it does, then you still have to do some work on yourself.
Yeah.
Yes. Can you
I know.
can you
She's
can you
right on the way?
can you rephrase that in another way? Because that hits me, but I want it to hit even
Almost
more.
like projections too of like,
It's fear.
yeah.
It's fear. You know, I have to set you talked about perfectionistic. I have
Yeah.
to set the standard, and it goes back to control.
Yes.
Control who's in my environment. And that has nothing to do with you wanting to be a control freak. That's not what this is about.
Yeah.
And everything to do with, I don't feel like I can govern myself in an environment in which I'm not familiar. Therefore, if I control the actors and control the action, I can protect my sense of self.
Mm-hmm.
People who are really know who they are can go into any space and in any environment. And that's the kind of work that needs to be done within a couple. Because guess what? Life hits you, all different experiences, all different environments. If you have that grounded sense of self, you're going to be able to offer more in a relationship, offer more to business people, offer more to your staff, the people working alongside you, and be able to have different experiences because you're not afraid of what that means about who you are.
Yeah. How do we make sure that we can cultivate a grounded sense of self, even for those people that feel like, I feel pretty connected, I feel pretty authentic? How can I make sure that I truly am grounded in myself? What are some of those pillars that come to mind?
One thing that comes to mind is kind of thinking about even doing a body scan. And if you think about kind of who you are as a person, if you start to feel something, start to get agitated, you know, there's something there that is maybe disrupted. And so you might want to explore that.
Like
with
lean
therapy.
into that a little bit.
Right.
Yeah.
Whether you do journaling, professional help, whatever. But again, your body is the first to tell you. So if there's a part of you that's walking around lying to yourself, saying what a great person you are, if you just sat for a minute and started thinking about, you know, what do I really think about myself? And something starts to hurt, that would be one way to start thinking about, okay, I need to really look at my sense of self. A second thing is, don't listen to anybody, right? Like there's enough stuff going on in this world where people will have judgments and say things about who you are. That doesn't mean anything about who you are as a person. That means something about them on that day. That's their thing. That doesn't mean anything about who you are as a person. You know, you really want to be thinking about the guidance and the support of people who love you, who know you. And that's not to say everybody's perfect. And it doesn't mean put up your earmuffs and don't listen to anyone and be defensive. That's not what this means. What it means is that you are curious about who you are, and you're talking to people who know you best and who love you, because they can package a message that says, hey, listen, you know, that wasn't a cool thing you did. But you know, we also care about you, and you're still an awesome person, but maybe in the future you might want to Okay. So we have to have people in our lives to be able to give us that message. Things on technology, people that we might select out for a voice are not necessarily going to give us that message. We're going to select the messages that make us feel good, but maybe not are true or what we need to hear. Right. So you really thinking about, if people have judgments, let it go. That has nothing to do with who you are as a person, and be really thinking at the core of what it is that you want to achieve, what it is as you scan your body. Do you get any sense of disruption? Going in to explore that, and surrounding yourself with people who love you, who can give you good feedback about who you are that is separate from your identity.
Internal and external influences.
Very different, very different.
One of the things that Amanda and I do, or at least I make sure that I do, is I ask for feedback on how I'm showing up as a husband.
Yes.
And I think that
Yes, we have a lot of those uncomfortable. I want to call them uncomfortable conversations,
No, they're
but they
growth conversations.
They're very growth conversations. We just had one on Sunday.
Because like I get in habits and patterns of behavior depending on the demands that are coming at me, and I don't want to assume that I'm showing up as a good husband. So like I ask, where am I not showing up the way that you'd like me to show up? Or what do I need to hear that I haven't heard in a while? Or like, what do you need to remind me of that I need to remember? You know?
Sure, yeah.
Something like that I think is a really also good takeaway.
Well,
I think that's fantastic.
Yeah,
It's a fantastic
instead of having
thing to
the
do.
argument and like, typically it's like, oh, he did that. Let me tuck that away in my little filing cabinet. And then let me implode it after
Later,
a month
10 years
that
later.
I'm like, or 10 years, I
Yeah.
guess. Maybe
Well,
I'm not
sorry.
that.
Sorry. I see couples where it comes out 10 years later. So sorry. Remember the
You're
one
like,
thing in
why don't you-
1982? I'm like, oh, we're back there. Okay.
Yeah. Well, because feedback is hard to hear.
It's hard to hear even when you feel like you have a good sense of self.
Yeah.
It's hard to hear. It's even worse to hear if you don't really know who you are, or you've been through some traumatic experience that have compromised your sense of self and what you tell yourself about who you are, then it becomes very difficult to hear.
Well, because we get it as like, we see it through the lens of being criticized.
Yes, and
versus
it's
through the
not.
lens of how can this be a teachable moment? How can I
For
grow from
sure.
this, strengthen us as a relationship?
Yeah.
Anytime James opens up to me and shares something, I'll be, thank you so much for sharing that with me.
Yes, for sure.
But that's the lens through which I feel like we got introduced into personal development when we were like early in our 20s, like
Yes.
20, 21.
Yeah.
So we've had this lens cultivated through like our entire relationship. And I know not everybody has that lens.
Right.
And I mean, now we're in a day and age where information is just everywhere and has a lot more reachability and like different
sure.
resources for people to gain those things. But that back then, gosh, I remember those little conversations that we were having. And it just felt so different
Yes.
in a relationship. And we got so close so fast
Sure.
because I think we've really cut the bullshit.
Yes.
We were able to be
Yeah.
vulnerable with each other so much. James took me to this mountain. I got to tell her the mountain story. We were early in our dating and I
Okay.
was fine being single and doing my thing. I was
Yeah.
focused. And I'm like, gosh, why does he have to come along now? He takes me up on this hike to this mountain. He's like, this is where I go. This is where I like to think. And he goes, I just want to let you know, like, I value growth. And if we're not going to be growing in our relationship, then there's no reason to be together. What do you think?
I love this. I love this story. Yes.
I like took a minute over and I was like, whew. Okay, Amanda, this is everything you've wanted to hear in a man in a relationship.
Right.
This is everything you stand for. Oh my God, but this is so scary.
Oh, horrible. Horrible.
What if we're not growing?
Yeah, right.
What if I don't grow? What if I
Right.
don't grow in the rate that he wants me to grow? I felt like I was silent for like 20 minutes, easily
Sure.
like contemplating and sifting through all of the things because it was so scary to lean into. And finally I said, yes, I agree.
Yes, right.
And we
right,
went
right.
forward, but that was always in the back of my mind is
Right.
growth. And even though I was so growth oriented, I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to make sure that we're growing because I want to be with this person so that we can, but that's how early like those uncomfortable conversations really started occurring for us.
And I think the two of you are a perfect example of why it has to be common practice. It's much more difficult after 5, 10, 15 years to come into my office and then reveal that something that happened 10 years ago had this kind of impact and there weren't those communications. When I work with couples, I work with them on messaging, and there's a great book called Messages, which I encourage people to get. And it's just about these daily communication strategies that you've talked about. It's far better to have these small interactions that are positive than get to a place where you have an interaction that's long and negative, because then you're not going to have that communication again, right? So the daily conversations are going to be far better for moving forward in relationships.
Yeah, it's just those little tweaks, little
sure.
sacrifices that, you know, taking that time out. Because we believe, and maybe you believe this too in your relationship, that we are always dating each other.
Sure.
We should be always dating each other. You know, we should be doing those little acts of kindness and those extra little things
Sure,
and
yeah.
spicing up the sex life and just all of the little things because now we're husband and wife and now we're mom and dad.
Yes.
Now we're business. We're wearing a lot of different hats, but
Oh,
the most
sure.
important, we're still dating.
Yes.
Do you feel like dating your spouse is something that everyone should be doing?
I think so. I think it's really important. And when you think about a date, or, you know, even that dating practice, the mentality is around dating is we're getting to know each other, which is going to be consistent for couples over the lifespan, because again, things change. You have a bad day at work. You have a good day at work. That might make an impact on you that your partner needs to know about. And if you're not in that practice of let me share things with you, like we are in the dating phase, that's going to be missed.
Yeah.
And another piece of it is, again, continuing to be flexible and creative and bring in something new. So if you do end up as a couple sort of, you know, doing formal dates where you continue to go out once every couple weeks or whatever, switch it up, you know, get out of the kind of, you know, let's go to dinner and a movie every 2 weeks. Like, that's great.
Yeah.
But you're going to end up having the same conversations about the kids. This is what happened at school. This is what happened at work. So it's really important to switch it up and get out of those practices.
And have the inconsistency in the consistency,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Date night every
surprise is
Tuesday,
exciting.
but we don't know what we're going to do
We're
on
gonna go to a
Tuesday.
concert.
That's precisely it.
Yeah.
Right.
You pick one, I pick
Yeah,
one.
exactly.
That's it.
Exactly.
Reciprocity is huge in relationships. And to be
Yeah.
able to demonstrate that in any way you can, physically, relationally, intellectually, you're better off.
Well, we've talked about so much, and there's a few things I wanted to close out on because I want to be mindful
Okay.
of time.
Okay.
I wanted to talk about this concept of sacrifice when you're going for your goals, and how does that impact your significant other? I mean,
Sure.
you've been in your relationship, you said 25 years.
I have. Yep.
And you've got a son who's in high school.
I do.
And so you wear multiple different hats. You're doing a lot of things. You're performing at a high level. What have you had to sacrifice to get here? And how have your sacrifices changed within to make time for all the things that you want to do, pursue your own goals
Oh, wow.
while maintaining your marriage and being a mom?
I think kind of early on, my sacrifices were in the area of time.
Mm-hmm.
So I was in graduate school and doing a lot of work to try to get ahead. And there was a lot of commitment to that effort. And I think in that way, my husband sacrificed a lot. It's difficult to go from, living in one place and then moving to another. At that time, he was a software engineer. Maybe he was a computer programmer at the time, but we were moving from Chicago to Virginia, and he ended up getting laid off in Virginia, and the jobs in Virginia, the market's very different than Chicago, as you might imagine, for, computer work.
Mm-hmm.
So he ended up taking a pay cut. And so I think that was an enormous sacrifice for the
Yeah.
family. A second sacrifice, I think, would be kind of living the routine of the school year, right? My family had to get around a rhythm of when school was. And part of that was, if we decide to have a child, there has to be a break in the summer. And so we have to sort of plan to have a kid in the summer, and, which was very challenging to do, as you might imagine.
Yep.
And then I think just being an academic and being the kind of academic I am, writing a lot, doing a lot of research, supervision, having a clinical practice on the side. There's been some sacrifices in my family in terms of being at home. Clients and families and couples don't tend to come in during the day. They have to be there at night. And so there were kind of those sacrifices along the way. I was never really sure whether I was a good mom, and I'm probably not still sure. I felt like the times when I was at work, I was not a good mom, but I was a really good employee. And this is still true. I don't know why I'm saying past tense. It's still true. And the times that I am with my son, I may be a good mom, but I'm not a good employee.
Yeah.
And to be fair, I've never actually resolved that.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer. I don't know if I made the right choice. And I'll talk to my son about it, and I'll talk to my husband about it. And they're all very supportive. They're all like, well, Mom, had you not done these things, we wouldn't have had these opportunities. We had the chance to go to Austria, and I got a Fulbright, and, that was an amazing opportunity for the whole family. But maybe we shouldn't have done that. And maybe I should have been a more traditional mother. Most of my friends are stay-at-home moms, and I don't do that. And I don't know what that looks like. And I wonder if I made the wrong choice. So, another piece of it, I think, is there was kind of a hit to my self-confidence as a mother. And I think perhaps in some ways with, university life can be a little bit crazy sometimes, perhaps my sanity sometimes. Like, this is a lot. So trying to make sure that I have as good a home life as I can to help balance some of those things works. And I'm lucky. Like, my husband and I, over the years, we've grown together more than we've grown apart. And I really think that's just in some ways dumb luck. There was some work and also just dumb luck. And I'm just so grateful for dumb luck sometimes.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us, especially the mother piece, because I'm definitely at this point where we've worked so much to build some of James's goals and dreams.
Yeah.
And now I'm in this chapter where he's really supporting my goals and dreams.
Absolutely.
But now I'm a young mom. We have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old.
For sure.
What does that look like to be in a master's program? I don't know. People are
I
like,
can't imagine.
how are you going to do it? I'm like, I don't know. We're going to take it one little bit at a time, a little bit nervous, a little bit excited, but also I know this is my path.
Absolutely.
And if I don't answer this for myself, what kind of example am I being for my kids?
Of course. Exactly.
Yeah. So even if there's that heartache, I feel like as your son gets older and can understand the choices that you made, he's going to look at you and be like, you were such a great role model too at the same time.
I hope so. I hope that's what he gets from it, because if he doesn't, then I kind of did it for nothing. When I was pregnant, I called I was talking to my parents on the phone, and my dad was like, well, I'd been at the university maybe a year and a half when I found out I was pregnant. And my dad was like, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to, stop being a professor? And I was like, no. And I thought, you don't know me at all. I'm like, whoa, like I literally did all this school to just walk on. No, oh, that's not me. But I always think about that conversation. Maybe I'm not sure. I'm a good academic.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was worth it. And we'll have to ask him.
Mm.
We'll have to ask his therapist. When he's 35. I don't know. How did I do? I'm not real sure.
At least you have the tools. You have the tools that most of us all want to be able to like repair anything as it comes up. And I'm like, gosh, when I'm in class, I'm like, are some of these things inevitable? Because I'm really trying to consciously parent here.
Yeah.
Oh man. Okay, I did that thing. Okay, let me repair right now.
That's it.
Oh,
I told my son
it's
the
a
other
lot.
day, he had like a friend issue. I said, honey, it doesn't matter what happened, what you did. Everybody makes mistakes. It's important about the repair. You got to learn how to repair. You got to learn how to repair.
Yeah.
So,
And the same thing can be true with your partner.
of course. You know, no one is ever perfect, not even close.
Yeah.
But can you engage in the repair in a way that is mature and honest and vulnerable and authentic? And if you can get that done, then you have a good chance.
Yeah.
One last question.
Sure.
What's your favorite way of getting to know yourself more?
Oh,
Mm.
my favorite way, painting.
Mm.
I am a landscape artist on the side, and I sell some of my paintings sometimes, and I give them away other times. And that is the time when I am not anybody's mother. I'm not anybody's therapist. I'm not anybody's professor. I actually am able to just really kind of lose myself and get to know myself in those moments. So when I can just escape and paint something in the garage, I just love that.
Great.
I love that.
That's cool.
That's
Awesome. Well, thank you. Yeah. That's...
I knew I chose a good advisor for my program. I was like, who's gonna be your advisor for the program? I was like, Kat, of course. It's so funny you say that because that's my therapeutic.
Is that really?
Is painting,
She's
oil
really good
paints.
too.
Oil paint. That's what I do. Oil
Yeah.
landscapes. Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't gotten back to it in some time, as you can imagine.
Well,
but
it'll be another 2.5 years before you do. However, I encourage you to not wait that long.
No,
You know, you're a painter who engages in therapy,
Yeah,
not a therapist who engages in painting. Right. So try to think about your identity in that way.
yeah. I do all the painting things with the boys.
Yes.
I love it.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
It has to come through in some way. Well, thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome.
Thank
I had
you
a good
for
time.
sharing your wisdom with us, expertise, viewpoints on life, perception through the lens of a therapist, and then also sharing some of the more vulnerable pieces of yourself.
No problem. I had a good time. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed myself.
Thank you
course.
for coming.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning
Bye.
in. Appreciate you. Take these lessons, these strategies, these ideas, and utilize them in the best way that you know how. Until next time, go out there and be your own 1%. Peace.